Good evening and merhaba. Tonight, we are honored to have an eminent professor of geology from Valdosta University, namely Dr. Jon Denizman, as our speaker, for which I am indebted to Dr. Bahram Hojjati, professor of the same university and a friend of Kanoon and POOIA. So many of you know what POOIA is, but for the few who do not, POOIA is an affiliate of Persian Cultural Center and is a non-religious, non-political, and purely an independent organization which predominantly invites scholars in different fields to give us a wide spectrum of information regarding their fields, in addition to human sciences and cultural issues related to our country. I will introduce our distinguished speaker. Dr. Jon Denizman, of course, his name in Turkish is C-A-N, John, John Yaman. Those of you who watch the series, we also have John Yaman. And Dr. Jon Denizman received his BS degree in hydrogeological engineering from Hacettepe University in Ankara, Turkey. And while working for the International Center of Karst Water Resources, he's going to explain what karst is, resources. He continued his education and received his MS degree from the same university. Then he relocated to US to pursue his PhD degree, and he completed his PhD in geology from the University of Florida with a dissertation topic on the application of Geographic Information Systems, GIS, to the evolution of karst in Florida. After receiving his PhD, he worked for industry in Orlando and Gainesville, Florida for a few years, and then became a member of faculty of geosciences program at Valdosta State University, VSU, in 2001. He's currently a professor at Valdosta State University and has published numerous articles in various scientific journals related to his research subjects of hydrogeology and environmental and engineering issues with sinkholes. And tonight he's going to talk about environmental and engineering issues with sinkholes in Florida and other regions of the world. Dr. Denizman, I thank you very much, from this, on behalf of Kanoon, Kanoon Iranian Atlanta, or Persian Cultural Center, and POOIA, Professional Organization of Iranian Americans. And we are all ears to hear what you have to say tonight. Thank you so, so much.
Well, thank you very much. That was a wonderful introduction. It's my honor to be here talking to you guys, and this is my first time talking to such a distinguished crowd, and coming from a country with such a huge heritage of literature and science and civilization. I'm talking about your country, of course. That's wonderful. So anyway, let me just open up my PowerPoint. We're going to talk about some geology today. I guess everybody can see this, right? Am I sharing?
Not yet. Not yet.
I need to share this, first of all, right?
Yeah, share.
I got to share this thing.
Can you make it bigger?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to be covering two different topics here. First of all, we're going to talk about some basic terms to understand all the other discussions. First of all, we're going to talk about what karst is, because it's not a term that you can hear every day. And then we will talk about these issues that we face in these karst regions, namely environmental issues and engineering issues. We're going to talk about all these things. So let me briefly explain what we mean by karst. It's actually a very simple process. There's a lot of karst in Florida. There's a lot of karst in Iran. There's a lot of karst in Turkey. It's a geological formation. Some of these geological formations are soluble. They are not stable when there is any kind of slightly acidic environment. I'm talking about water, just groundwater or the water that infiltrates through the soil is acidic enough to dissolve these rocks. These rocks dissolve. Okay, so when they dissolve, we get a lot of cavities. So one of the most common rocks that we see that is soluble is carbonate rocks, we call them, because it consists of calcium carbonate, limestone chiefly. That's the most common rock that we see all these dissolution events, dissolution processes. There's also gypsum. It's not as common as limestone, but limestone is like, that's what we're going to talk about. It dissolves, and because of that dissolution, we have some things happening in the rock. So that's the topic today. Okay, so karst. And that's called karst because it comes, I'll show you in a map in a minute. It comes from an area between Slovenia and Italy. There's a place called Karsol, and the name comes from there. That's where we have a lot of limestones and a lot of sinkholes. Okay, so I don't want to go into the heavy chemistry here, but it's a very simple process. We have carbon dioxide and water. When they combine, we get an acid, carbonic acid, and this is actually a very slight acid. It's not a big, it's softer than Coca-Cola. Okay, yet it is strong enough to dissolve this calcium carbonate, which is a mineral called calcite, which is the mineral that makes limestone. So when acid reacts with calcium carbonate, we end up with these dissolved ions in the water, and the solid rock is dissolved. That is a very simple process. And there is nothing, there's nothing, no contamination issues. There's nothing artificial about it. It's just naturally occurring thing. Because as water infiltrates through the soil, there's a lot of carbon dioxide in the soil because of biologic activities. And, water picks up that carbon dioxide, becomes an acid, and then it generally follows the weakest points in the rock. The weakest points in the rocks are these fractures. So whenever a rock finds a fracture, it starts eating that rock along the fracture. Then it moves downhill, and then, enlarge this cavity, so this fracture, and then it moves probably laterally following some other zones of weaknesses. So eventually, as long as you have carbon dioxide source, and as long as there's infiltration of water, this rock is going to dissolve. And you will end up with these cavities. And these cavities will cause some problems later on. We'll talk about that. So this is basically, it's a dissolution process. We call that karst. And it all happens in the carbonate rocks, okay? So when we look at the carbonate rocks, it's actually a pretty big area, like a lot of them in North America. And there is a lot here in Europe and Asia as well. I want to talk about this, like starting from like Spain all the way down here. This is called Alpine Himalayan orogeny. All the way to the Alps is the same rock. It's the same geologic process. There used to be an ocean here between India and Eurasia. There used to be an ocean between right here, for example. So that ocean is closed, and all the limestones in that ocean is exposed today on the surface. So it's all of these rocks formed in marine conditions, in the oceanic environment. As a matter of fact, if you step down, like if you're on top of Mount Everest, okay, and you're stepping on a rock called limestone, and that rock is formed in a marine environment, in an ocean. So an oceanic rock is the highest rock today on the surface. So this whole area, I'm going to talk about Turkey. I got several examples from Iran as well. These Taurus Mountains, Zagros Mountains, these are all limestone, and they are all vulnerable to dissolution, so they got a lot of karst. In the meantime, limestone also has a lot of void spaces. We call them pores. So they actually also form wonderful rocks to store not only water, but in this case, in Arabia, in petroleum. All the petroleum is in limestone here. These beautiful Jurassic limestone of the ancient ocean called Tethys. So I'm going to focus on Florida. Florida is a different climate. It's got subtropical climate. We have Mediterranean climate here, and in this Turkish area. So, and the climate is of course important because climate controls how much water you have in the area. The more water you have, the more limestone will be dissolved. Of course, it all happens with the water, and the warmer it is, the faster the process, and so forth. Anyway, I don't want to go to the details of that, but let's talk about some things. Like if you have a karst landscape, these are the things you will see in a karst landscape. You're going to see interesting depressions. We call them sinkholes, rounded depressions. You're going to see a lot of springs. There will be plenty of water coming from the rocks, and there will be a lot of streams that disappear. All of a sudden, you got a stream and it disappears. Okay, that is pretty unusual. You don't see that in any other terrain, any other rocks. I'll show you an example. Like, for example, this is such a beautiful, typical karst terrain. It's like, this is Turkey. And I'll show you where it is located. This spectacular limestone rocks, and you see how they are dissolved. You see all these superficial dissolution features. Okay, or you got these huge, all of a sudden you got these collapse sinkholes. We call them obruk in Turkey. Opens up in the middle of the nowhere, like this, for example. So because the rock is dissolved. And then we have these beautiful caves. Again, this is from Turkey as well. Okay, so we're talking about this. These, can you see? Everybody can see it, right? So these are the mountains I'm talking about. It comes all the way through, all these Italian Alps, all the way down here, then Greece, and then it moves down here. These are the Taurus Mountains. Then it moves down into Zagros Mountains, to Iran. So what I see here is a lot of these sinkholes open up here. Like overnight, you get these huge sinkholes opening up in these areas, or these beautiful, beautiful mountains of limestone. And here is Karain Cave. The cave that I was talking about is right around here, somewhere here. This is a very famous city, Antalya. It's a tourist hub. But right here, we got this cave, which is shown here. So this is a cave that is, I just wanted to share with you because it's got Paleolithic archaeological remains there. So people used to live there. And here is a picture from England. Again, you can see again karst dissolution here. All these cavities or all these fractures are the vulnerable places for these rocks to be attacked by the water. And you see these extremely difficult terrain to walk. These are known as carens, superficial limestones, superficial features of karst. Or extreme example is this is Madagascar. Madagascar has this bizarre limestones like this. It's all formed by the dissolution of the rock. Okay, these are again karst, limestone dissolved. And this is the typical, this is the origin of the term karst. It's coming from here, Slovenia and Croatia. As you can see, there's nothing but depressions all over the place. And there's not much superficial water here because almost all the water is soaked up by the rock. Because the rock has so much cavities, so much void spaces. It's almost like Swiss cheese. Okay, the rock takes all the water inside. You don't get a lot of surface water. You get a lot of underground water, which we call groundwater in these areas. So it's kind of interesting because you may have some water scarce, water problems, water quantity problems on the surface, whereas there is a lot of water below the surface in these areas. So this is, again, perfect example of a Mediterranean temperate karst, temperate climate karst. So yet another diagram that shows the same thing, carbon dioxide moving into the, rock, and then you got this disappearing stream here. You can see the disappearing stream. I want to show you a disappearing stream right here. This is about 10 miles from our campus, Valhalla State University. This thing opened up overnight. There was nothing like this here. So we heard about it. So the following day we visited. There are two creeks here. One is coming from here. The other one is going this way. So this is the junction of these two creeks. And all of a sudden, this thing opened up and everything just basically disappears into this cave system. And this is typical disappearing stream. Let me show you another disappearing stream. Santa Fe River. It's a pretty big river in Florida, and it disappears. And then about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 miles downstream, it shows up on the surface. So that is like something that you will never see in any other geological formation. The whole river disappearing. Just a second, let me show you. This is in Florida. I'm going to show you where in Florida we are. So almost like the central Florida, there's a place called Olino State Park. Olino State Park is where the whole Santa Fe River disappears. Right here. It comes on here. Here's a sinkhole. And by the way, all these dots you see here, they're all karstic depression. They are all sinkholes. And there's a big old sinkhole here. Right? Everything disappears here. The whole spring or stream disappears under the ground. And then that's the story. Then it becomes groundwater. And then it moves downhill and it moves under the ground until here. River rise. It comes back to the surface. So this is, just from the geological point of view, it's kind of interesting. It doesn't happen everywhere. But another interesting thing here is, which something I'm going to talk about later when I discuss environmental issues. So whatever is on the river, what kind of contaminants, what kind of chemicals were in the river, actually joined. Everything is going into the groundwater. All the contamination, everything, directly goes into the groundwater, and the groundwater is the water that we use to drink, that we use for our own daily life. So whatever is on the stream is whatever we drink, because it directly goes to the underground. So that's something we're going to discuss later. Okay. Okay, so if you take a look at evolution of a topography, so it starts out like this. You got some sinkholes, some water. This is the groundwater. Then if there is a stream, especially, the stream is going to start down cutting the valley. So the valley gets deeper. As the valley gets deeper, groundwater goes down as well. So you're going to see some of these former cavities becoming dry caves now. As the caves go dry, you're going to see some collapses and so forth. I'll show you how we get all of these forms. So these are the things that you see in a typical karst terrain: sinking streams, some springs coming over, and not much water on the surface, and things like that. In a temperate climate, so the climate is important, of course, but for example, in a humid climate, you may have some complete, even more exaggerated karstic landforms. Like this is called tower karst, especially in humid climates like this. China and Vietnam is exactly the same process. You got these karst towers, and everything is formed by the dissolution of the rock, and we end up with these beautiful towers. You can This is something you probably see in many Chinese restaurants. And whenever you go to a Chinese restaurant, sometimes they have these murals or some paintings of this topography. Again, this is the same thing, formed by the same situation, just, you know, dissolution of limestone. As a matter of fact, there's the biggest cave I think it's in Vietnam. They discovered this huge cave. There's actually, it's got its own climate inside there. It's got its own clouds, its own, like almost like a different world. It's so huge. Anyway, of course, and we're not surprised because these are the areas with a lot of rainfall and temperature. So everything, the rock is going to dissolve very readily, very, fast. So therefore, you can see all these developments there, karstic features. This is a perfect picture of something in America, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. Kentucky has got all these beautiful limestones. As you can see, the cave actually forms right at a fracture. You see this fracture? I told you the importance of the fracture in the beginning. These fractures are the weak zones of the rock. So water is going to start attacking these fractures and also these layers. See the layers of the rock? So this cave is definitely controlled by this fracture. And as you walk in, you can actually follow the fracture on the ceiling of the cave because as it winds around, you see the fracture controlling. So karst is, definitely controlled by structural features like these fractures or some cracks in the rock. Okay, that's another thing. And sometimes we see these beautiful features. We call them cave formations. I think this one is from another beautiful cave in New Mexico. It's called Carlsbad Caverns. Just incredibly beautiful cave formations like these stalactites that come from the ceiling and stalagmites. And right here, and when they meet, you call them a column, and just spectacular features like this. Again, we can get a lot of information from these caves by using, for example, they do isotope analyses in these stalactites and these isotopes. Like since this is calcium carbonate, there's oxygen inside. So oxygen has isotopes, as you can see, oxygen 16 and 18. So when they look at oxygen 16 and 18 ratios, they can actually speculate about the climate because oxygen 16, 18 ratio is controlled by the temperature. So these stalactites provide a lot of insight to us, and they can be dated by carbon-14 techniques, radioactivity. So everything is, there's a lot of studies around these cave stalactites. All right, now let's talk about problems that we face in karst areas. There's going to be ground stability problems. As you can imagine, we got some rocks that are not really solid. They have a lot of cavities, so eventually you will have some problems. So I will talk about that. There may be some lack of surface water, especially in some areas like in former Yugoslavia, now Slovenia, or in Turkey, because almost all the surface water is soaked up by the rock. The rock is like I said, like Swiss cheese, takes all the water from the surface and nothing stays on the surface in extremely developed karst areas. Groundwater quantity, therefore, can be a problem, especially in areas where there is a lot of population. And most importantly, groundwater quality is definitely vulnerable in these areas. I'll show you why it's so vulnerable in a minute. Okay, so we got large underground caves forming, and under certain conditions, the chambers will collapse to form a sinkhole. So what will be the driving forces? Like what kind of things will enhance sinkhole formation? If we want to talk about it, maybe, for example, if we pump the water too much, like for example, if the cave is filled with water, so we got a lot of caves underneath us, and it's filled with water, which is called groundwater. So it's actually stable because water is actually kind of, you know, has this force and basically carrying the overlying weight. So if you overpump it, if you overpump the groundwater, if you get these caves empty, if the water level goes down in the ground, so these caves become dry caves, and since there is not enough support, they may basically collapse. That's one thing, and it's very common. It's one of the common things because we need more and more water ground because we got a lot of population. Okay, so I don't know if you guys are following the news, but like, for example, Tampa area, Orlando area, these are the locations where we see a lot of sinkholes opening up all of a sudden. And it's just because there's so many people. So we need to pump more water from the ground to feed those guys. And when you pump so much water, the water table goes down and you get sinkholes. It's that simple. It happens. If you have heavy load, that's going to cause sinkhole formation, of course. It doesn't look intuitive, but if you have a lot of rainfall, you can have sinkholes as well. Because rainfall, there are a lot of ancient sinkholes that have been filled up with some sediments, some dirt, some mud. So if you have some rainfall, that mud can be washed away from the cavities, and you can have some sinkholes as well. So very heavy rainfall or very long droughts, two extreme opposites, may result in sinkhole formation. And sometimes when we drill, sometimes we hit a cave, and basically that's another thing that happens. This formation of a sinkhole. Generally not a threat to human well-being because most of the sinkholes are not collapse sinkholes. I'll tell you, most of them occurs gradually. Those occur in a very short time, of course, a big deal. That's when you get a lot of people dying. Of course, property damage is inevitable. There used to be, there is a lot of sinkhole business in Florida, for example. There's a lot of sinkhole remediation companies, sinkhole detection companies, and so forth. They used to be covered by sinkhole insurance. I think they don't have sinkhole insurance anymore. The business was much more, profiting, not anymore. But still, property damage is definitely a subject. Okay, so you can talk about 3 different types of sinkholes, and they are very, very easy to understand. One of them is dissolution begins from the surface, okay? So you get a cave forming, and you're going to see these dissolution sinkholes on the surface. These are going to be like small ponds, small depressions on the surface, gradually taking place. It's not a hazard at all, but of course, it's going to be a instability for the properties around that place. So this is very common. Sometimes you can have this subsidence sinkholes. Again, you got some cavities and it subsides very slowly, okay? And then there's not much you can do about it. You see some cracks in your driveway, for example. You see some cracks in your walls, or the doors may not be closing anymore. So these are all telltale signs for subsidence sinkholes, okay? The most dangerous sinkhole is called collapse sinkholes. They occur when there is a much thicker overlying material. So you got the limestone, and imagine that material overlying the limestone is very thick, okay? Which is the case in most Florida, actually. Orlando area has a thick clay cover on top of limestones. So then you may not even feel anything because you got this beautiful, very thick clays before you hit the limestone. Limestone is kind of deep, but limestone is still being dissolved. And after a certain time, you get a collapse of the whole overlying material. It just collapses into this huge sinkhole that nobody knew it was opening up for a huge cave into the, and then these are the most dangerous ones. They actually cause a lot of, fatality, actually. I believe I got a slide of this infamous sinkhole opened up overnight, or not, maybe 10 minutes or so. This is in Winter Park, Orlando. This was a big deal, actually. And again, the reason why this occurred is there's a thick clay layer on top of the limestone, and that clay layer collapsed into the underlying cave that nobody knew about. Okay, and there were some Porsche, Porsche, I don't know how to pronounce that car name, galleries there, so dealers, some Porsche swallowed by the sinkhole. I believe several people, I don't know how many people died, but it was not, maybe one or two. If you go to Winter Park, Orlando, now this is a beautiful park. They turn into a park. This is like a pond now. There's water inside. Okay. This is a collapsed sinkhole. Another collapsed sinkhole. I believe again, this is in Florida, which is infamous with these sinkholes because Florida is nothing but limestone. There's no other thing happening in Florida. This is New Zealand, of course. This is Lake City. Anyway, so what can we do? How can we deal with these sinkholes? Look for fractures and vent structures, insurance issues, and mostly not covered, but there are several things we do. As a matter of fact, in Florida, people come over and ask our help, and we do some help. Did I get twice? Am I blurring here, or just, I don't know, can you see me well? Okay.
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah, better, yeah.
So anyway, what's happening here? Let me just turn on this light. Okay.
Yeah.
So what happens is we got these instruments that we use, namely geophysical instruments. Geophysics is a tool or a subdiscipline of geology where we can see what's happening under the ground. So if we can see if there's a cavity under the ground, that means there's going to be a sinkhole. So that's what we do. One of the very common tools of geophysics, much easier to use, is called ground penetrating radar, GPR. So we do this GPR, and when we do that, we can see, for example, this is a real sinkhole. We did this in our using our instruments on our campus. You see this whole red color is a void. Okay. I'm sorry, this is another thing, ER, electrical resistivity. That's another technique which is much more accurate, or we can tell a lot of voids using, because ground penetrating radar may not be efficient if you have wet conditions. For example, if you have clay, you may have some noise there. So, but electrical resistivity tells you everything. So that's one way of finding out these cavities. That's what we did. Or this is a ground penetrating radar that we did as well. This was a pretty interesting scenario, interesting process happened near Valdosta. They called me, they told me that there's this I don't know if you may not remember, there was a admissions director in our Valdosta State University. I forgot his name. Peacock, Walter Peacock. Yeah, Walter Peacock lives right by a lake, and he told me one day something happened at night, and when they woke up in the morning, they saw an island in the lake. This overnight, there was an island in the lake, a small island. So he asked me to go and check it out. So there was Eric Breivik, remember Eric Breivik? So, we had this GPR unit at that time. We borrowed from somebody else. So we were basically, we did everything on the lake. And our theory was there was a collapse occurring here, some sliding of the material. Like this is all collapse, this whole thing. This is a cavity. And some of the layers basically moved up because of this sliding of the layers. Like this is actually above sea level, above the lake level. Basically because of the collapse, some of the material moved up to the above the lake and so forth. Anyway, the short story is we can use ground penetrating radar, GPR, to see these sinkholes, detect these sinkholes very efficiently, really. So once we get them, so what do we do? Well, depending on how much money you're going to spend, depending on how essential the area is, if it's in the middle of the nowhere, nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to, complain about it. But if you are in the middle of a highway like this, you're going to have to deal with that, of course. We basically inject grout, cement, we call that grout. You fill the sinkhole, whatever it takes, sometimes pretty expensive, a lot of grout filling into this cavity. All you need to do is fill the cavity. That's it. Basically that's it. So we do that depending on how much money we want to spend on this thing or how essential it is. And then we seal it and so forth. That's how we deal with this. This is what, for example, Polk Country, Florida, sinkhole remediation, 4,000 cubic yards concrete. Basically, they injected there because I guess, I don't know why was it so important, this area, but I guess, they just wanted to close it. Okay. There are some other dramatic examples I'll give you, like this. Like, as you can imagine, then it should be a huge engineering problem to build all these structures in karst areas. Like, for example, building a dam in a karst area. The rock is soluble, okay? So how can you provide, or how can you make sure that you will have enough water filling up the dam? You may not have water at the, like you spent, dam constructions are extremely costly and takes a long time, depending on the size of the dam. But, like, let me give you this example. This is a dam in Turkey. Okay, and it is, I'll show you where it is, just a second. Okay, Keban Barajı. See that? Keban Barajı? Keban Barajı means Keban Dam, barrage, like, So this is the river Euphrates. Euphrates River. Okay, this is like I remember in 1970, I was a kid when this was the biggest dam they ever constructed in Turkey at that time, 1970s, I guess. And of course, I didn't know anything about that, but after like a decade or so of spending, working on this thing, eventually, when they started filling it up, it is not filling. It is not filling as much as they wanted to fill. So, you spend millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, about 10 years of construction, the best engineers of the country and everything, and then it's not filling. So that's a problem, as you can see. So it turns out there were right after they started filling this up, some springs showed up somewhere here. Like all of a sudden, some new springs coming onto the surface. So, and this was a limestone area. Okay. So what did they do? This is what I just showed you. And here is a ponder. Ponder means sinkhole. And the springs show up here. Okay. And then they realized there is this huge, huge cave, right? I don't know where it is, somewhere here. A huge cave under the lake reservoir, the dam reservoir. So what you're going to do? You spend hundreds of millions of dollars. Of course, you're going to have to spend some more millions of dollars because you can't really abandon the project. So I don't know. They injected so much concrete into this cave to fill it up. And eventually it's working now. I mean, it's been very important, especially those days. After that, they built some more downstream. It's like even bigger dams. But again, a huge engineering challenge if you have karst areas. Like poor you know, the former Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is nothing but karst, okay? Slovenia, today's Croatia or Serbia, they have nothing but karst. And they have to build all these engineering structures, all these dams and everything on the karst terrains. Therefore, like one of the experts in that is a Serbian geologist called Peter Milanovic. Milanovic was actually, this is from Milanovic's paper. Milanovic wrote a paper on this thing. Anyway, so it's a big deal. It's a problem. This is from Iran. Lar Dam. Have you heard about Lar?
Lar, yes, yes, Lar.
Again, same problem. This symbol is limestone symbol, this brick symbol. So collapse occurred. And this is Kanoon Dam. It's again, these are all from Milanovic's paper. This is all, again, karst areas and problems with these structures. And here's a long list of dams experiencing huge problems. USA, France, Calvinist limestone, whatever limestone, Canada, and so like Mexico, Yugoslavia, of course. Oh, Skopje Dam. I didn't know that. Skopje is a huge city. So they got all these problems. So it's hard to deal with this problem. And it requires a lot of geophysical exploration before the dam construction. You know, you need to know if you have cavities under the ground. Caving, that a lot of people go there. The first caving, are there caves around the, you know, limestone or dam area and so forth. So that's a huge problem. Another problem is the water quality in these karst rocks. Like this may be a new term for you, but it's aquifer. Aquifer is a geologic rock that stores and transmits water, and that water is called groundwater. So any rock that has water in it is called aquifer. Okay. So of course, as you can imagine, all the limestones that I've been showing you, it's got so much void spaces. So they are all great aquifers. We call them karst aquifers because they are formed by cavities, these solutional cavities. Like this. This is Florida. So this is an aquifer, and this guy is swimming in our. This is our drinking water, by the way. So you know this is how it looks like. Under normal circumstances, if you had a regular rock like sandstone, or I don't know, alluvium, for example, these caves would be like like the porosities or the void spaces will be microscopic, like centimeter or 1 centimeter or so. That's where the water moves through very slowly, and as it moves through that, it's also filtered. But what we're talking about here is water is flowing within these huge cavities with no filtration whatsoever. And this is a spring called Wakala Spring, just south of Tallahassee. It's one of the biggest springs in the world. Anyway, so this is what happens. Let's take a look at these two geographies, two geologic conditions. We got two septic tanks. And this symbol is sandstone symbol, okay? And this symbol is limestone. So this guy's septic tank is sitting on top of a limestone, and this guy is sitting on a sandstone. As you can see, they both have contaminant plumes, contaminated water. But as it moves, this water is going to be cleaned. Because septic tanks basically, all that waste is microbially remediated. It's actually bacteria is going to attack, bacteria is going to dissolve or just clean this because it's not a chemical waste, it's just human waste. It's going to be clean, no problem. But what it needs is it needs some time. In other words, a slow motion and filtration in the meantime. So this water is filtrated because it's moving through sand particles. okay? And it's also attacked by microbes, and you end up with clean water after a short distance. If you got the same system in a cavities like these, a karst aquifer, the movement is much faster. The water moves like almost like a, not quite, but almost like a river water. It moves in large cavities. So there's not enough time for the microbes to attack the waste and clean it. So you end up with a lot of this contamination of the groundwater in these cases. I'll show you more examples. Like here, two geologic situations. One of them has limestone. You can see there's a septic tank, and this is the neighbor's well. Okay, I don't know, it may be several hundred meters, but this neighbor is pumping the contaminated water because the water moves in the limestone. It moves fast, and it is not cleaned by natural processes. Whereas, what is this? This is sandstone, right? Yeah, permeable sandstone. So in this case, no problems. Neighbor is going to have clean water because the water moves slowly. And it's like, look at that, time is months or years, the arrival time of the water. This is days or weeks. So this is a huge problem, susceptibility of karst aquifers to contamination. And speaking of karst aquifer, this is one of the most productive aquifers in the world. It's called Floridan aquifer. It's not Floridian, but Floridan aquifer. Like it covers all this area is Floridan aquifer, all the way to Charleston, South Carolina, all the way down to Miami. We got this huge limestone aquifer, a lot of caves, a lot of water, a lot of rainfall. So just one of the most productive aquifers. There are some numbers here. But the good thing is, so it's not really exposed to the surface. Whenever you see these brown areas are where the aquifer is covered with clay, which is good. In other words, whatever you have on the surface, any kind of contamination on the surface is not going to move into the limestone because this clay is going to stop it, which is a good thing. But if you look at it here, this is where the Suwannee River area is, or here the Floridan aquifer is exposed to anything. Whatever you pour on the ground, whatever happens on the ground directly goes to the aquifer and moves fast and moves with no filtration. So extremely vulnerable areas. Okay. And like when you strip off this, in this case, like here, the Floridan, you don't really see the limestone unless you are in the Suwannee River bank area. In many cases, you see some sand, which is not a big deal because sand is also, get the water in. It's not going to stop the water infiltrating into the aquifer. It's got some sand. If you strip off the sand, if you take off the sand, I'm talking about like 5-10 meters of sand, not a big deal. If you take that sand off, this is what you see. This is where we live in Florida. Okay, look at that. So I mean, it is just amazing. And basically, it's just like this, all these cavities. And this is basically how it moves. You got these sinkholes and springs, and as it moves through these fractures, it comes to the springs. Sometimes it goes all the way to the oceans. But in our case, for example, in Valdosta area, for example, we can say that, let's go back to Valdosta, like right around here, right? Valdosta or Orlando area, or even Tallahassee area, right? We think, man, we're okay here because, we got this thick clay overlying material. We call that overburden. So the Floridan aquifer is not exposed. So that means, it's protected from any superficial, problems of superficial contamination. That's what we think, right? Well, what about this? Look at that. Floridan aquifer is confined by these clays. So, you're saying, okay, everything is fine. Nothing is going to happen to my aquifer. But you got a sinkhole. And that sinkhole is a direct access to the aquifer. So whatever you charge, whatever you dump, and that's actually a very common practice, and especially in rural Florida, people dump everything into those sinks. Like, there's a lot of people living in the rural areas in Florida. I've seen a lot of them. Those guys dump their, for old tires, car batteries, barbecue grills. They just dump into these sinkholes because, it's like out of sight, out of mind, nobody cares. And they don't know what's going to happen because this is the water they drink. So basically, this is the water they drink because they have a well, and that well is basically taking that groundwater. So that's the problem here. As you can see, even though you may have some, cover material that will protect the aquifer, the cover material is pierced with these sinkholes. So there's no meaning to that anymore. Okay, that's a big problem. So I want to talk to you. I want to tell you a study that I carried out many years ago with all these caves. These are all caves, and also springs. All of these springs in Florida have cave systems because it's karst. It's in Florida. This is Suwannee River. Along the Suwannee River, we got a bunch of springs and caves, and here are some more caves. So I got these cave maps and everything, and I did everything in GIS. This environmental contamination potential of these springs, like how vulnerable they are to contamination based on the land use around them. What kind of land? If you have some, land use, you can have that can actually contaminate your groundwater. So let's take a look at that. Why did they show up again? I'm sorry. What happened? I'm sorry. Yeah, I have to start here. Okay, so here's the cave. I don't know which cave is this. I can't really read it. So, and I got the cave, map and everything. Then I looked, I think this is around like 5 kilometers around the cave, 5 kilometers around the spring. What kind of land use is there? That was the goal of the project. Okay, so as you can see, there's upland forest, there is water, there's agriculture. So we are interested in agriculture. Agriculture means fertilizers, nitrates and phosphates. Pastures. Pastures mean there's a lot of, livestock waste, nitrates, fecal matter, like, a lot of bacteria and so forth. Poultry feeding operations, rangeland. We don't want these. We don't want these land users around our springs because they, immediately they're going to cause a lot of problems, nitrate problems, phosphate problems. Okay, so I looked at these in all of these caves. What's happening here? Why do I have? And I got a paper here, and this is called Land Use Changes and Groundwater Quality in Florida. And for example, this one, I'm comparing the land use between 2004 and 2014. And these are the yellow, these are showing nitrate producing land use in these areas, like poultries and, agriculture and so forth. As you can see, like if you have more blue, that means it's increasing, like number 3, the spring number 3, spring number 21, 18. These guys have increased amounts of nitrate producing land uses. since 2004. Okay. This one shows residential areas. How did they change? Yellow is 2004, blue is 2013, 14. How did they change? As you can see, like there's a significant increase in that spring here, within that spring, residential areas. Residential means septic tanks, because there's no sewage systems there. This is confined, okay, septic systems, okay, per percentages. As you can see, all the, the sizes of these red dots show percentage of septic systems in this area. And K locations. K locations are these blues, and these triangles, look at that. These triangles are Department of Environmental cleanup sites. These are chemical contamination sites that are being cleaned up by the Department of Environmental Protection. Some of them are Superfund. Superfund means more than $1 million of cleanup. So look at how close they are to the springs. These cleanups are very different types of size. Some of them are gasoline tanks from the oil, what is that? Petroleum stations, gas stations. Some of them are coming from, I don't know, dry cleaners. Some of them are coming from some chemical factories. All of these guys are designated cleanup sites. They're so close to the springs.